Do you also know the symbolism of the Palestinian kufiya?
Is it the olive trees?
The olive trees, yeah. Usually I have my kufiya on for tours. I forgot it. But there's the little olive tree branches that are represented on there. You'll also find fishnets to represent Palestine's connections to the sea. And you're also going to find these lines that represents trade routes that are significant to Palestine throughout history. Because think about that connection of the water being there. It was a major land seaport. Yes. Any other common images or common themes that we find?
Birds.
Birds. Why are there a lot of birds?
Freedom. They symbolize freedom.
So they symbolize freedom, right? Because what can a bird do? It flies, right? Ooh. Anything else we saw that's worth noting? Any last things?
Oh, the keys for the houses.
The keys for the houses. Why are there keys for houses?
Hope of return. Yeah.
Hope of return, right? Something you'll notice is that not only are there keys represented, but I think a really good picture to look at and end on that kind of represents it is this one right here. This isn't the only piece that has this, but around this actually contains the UN resolution, specifically Resolution 194.3, Article 11, which talks about the right to return, which essentially states that if you are a refugee and you wish to return home, you are allowed to return home, especially if your means are to live there in peace. Obviously, that's a hope for many Palestinians. That's why we see these keys, they're hanging on to them. But the fact that we have the keys here in the museum, that represents the fact that that hope has not been fulfilled. So that being said, I wanted to say thank you all for engaging with this exhibit and for talking about it. I know it is a very difficult one to take in and to be able to discuss, and I think you all did an excellent job and you were very mature. Yeah. Alrighty, so with that being said, I'm going to take us to the second floor. So Arab world? 22, you all are good at this, wow. I'll sometimes show them that people are like, there's 100, and I'm like, no. But there are 22 Arab countries. Which continents are they in? Asia and Africa. You guys are smart. How many countries are in Asia?
18.
Lower than 18.
15.
Lower than 16. 12. So there are 12 in Asia, and then how many does that leave us in North Africa? 10. It's okay, I'm not the best at math either. But yes, we have 12 in Southwest Asia, and then 10 in North Africa. The reason why I call it the Arab world, and I'm not calling it Middle Eastern, do we know what the distinction between Middle East and Arab world is? Yes, the Middle East leaves out North Africa, so that's why I'm not calling it the Middle East. Another thing is that when we talk about the Middle East, maybe this is the one that tells me. Well, it might show you in a little bit, but the reason why I don't also refer to it as the Middle East is because a lot of countries that are included in the Middle East, like Afghanistan or Iran, those are not Arab countries. Do we know why they're not Arab countries? What languages do they speak there?
Farsi.
Persian or Farsi, right? Those are not, their official language is Arabic. Because one of the big things when it comes to being an Arab country is that you have to be able to speak, Arabic has to be one of your official languages. Do we know what might make an Arab country besides the language? Not religion. Culture. Your culture, their way of life. That's also another thing that makes an Arab country an Arab country. Obviously, culture isn't going to look the same. For example, across the Arab world, people wear kufiyas, right? But the designs on the kufiya, it's different from country to country. The colors too. For example, in Iraq, what are the colors of the kufiya that people usually see? Red and white. Versus Palestine, where it's usually black and white, right? So that's one common example. And then the last thing is membership in the Arab League, which nobody ever guesses. But have you all ever heard of the phrase Dual Arabiya?
Yes.
That's essentially the Arab League, just in Arabic terms. All right, and then last thing I will leave us off with is over here, we have a map of Palestine, specifically how it's changed over time, so spanning 1918 to 2017. Now, a lot of these go back to different events that we can think of that happened in Palestine. Do we know what some of these events are? Al-Nakba, what year did that happen? 1948, yes. So 1948, well, we see 1947. You'll notice that Palestine, for the most part, in the blue, it belongs to Palestinians. And the black is essentially what was given to Jewish settlers that were coming in that would eventually become what we call today Israel.
The Arab Revolt of 1912, which caused the 1918.
Yeah. Very good, yeah. So the Arab Revolt of 1912 is something that also led to like the British intervening and deciding this is how we're going to partition the land. And as you all can see right now in the 2017 map, which is kind of true to how it looks today, much of Palestine is essentially within the West Bank, which is that part in the center, and then also in the Gaza Strip, which is on the left. Now, do you have any questions about this map that you all see here? Or any of the events that might have led to this map looking the way that it does? Okay. Alrighty, so if you all can please go from one country to another, what is the word we use for them? An immigrant, right? Now, there's one type of immigrant that I'm thinking of. They're called refugees. Do we know what a refugee is?
Someone who's trying to skateboard.
Oh, hands. Yeah, what's a refugee?
Someone who's escaping from war.
Someone who's escaping from war. What else could they be escaping from? Famine. Religious freedom. Violence, yeah. How about if a tsunami comes and then my house is gone? Would I be a refugee? Yeah, so natural disasters. So many people that we're going to, the reason why I bring that up is because you're going to notice that as we go through the exhibits, something that we will pinpoint is whether or not somebody might be a refugee. Because if somebody's a refugee, do we think they're going to be more or less likely to bring different things with them to a new country? Less likely. You don't really have much time to really sit there and think, okay, what can I bring to this new country? Now, are there any items that stick out from the stuff that's behind me?
The Arab instruments.
Ooh, the Arab instruments. What instruments do we see represented? A drum. What is it called in Arabic? A tabla or derbeke. Yeah. What else do we see? Does anyone know what this is called? No, it's not ta'oud. Good guess. Ooh. So fun fact, this is called the rababa. You normally will not, this used to be basically the violin's older sister. So before the violin was a big thing, people in the Arab orchestra were actually playing a rababa. So as you can see, it doesn't look much like a violin, but the sound is there. Any other things behind me that kind of stick out? Yeah? Suitcases. Now, these suitcases, do they all look old or new or kind of a mix of both? Kind of like a mix of both, right? So remember how earlier Dean, with curatorial, mentioned that he thought that everybody who came to the U.S. that was Arab came here like 100 years ago? Or in the 80s? This is kind of meant to represent the fact that like some people might have immigrated like back in the 80s, kind of like his family did. Or they might have come in like 2017 and they might have just brought their little transport backpack with them. Any other things that stick out to us? Yeah. The toys. Do these toys look like the toys your little brothers and sisters play with, or do they look kind of old? They look pretty old. These are from the 1980s. They were brought by a young little Lebanese girl that was coming from the Lebanese Civil War to the U.S. So she was able to bring some toys with her. And now they're here with us, and they kind of look scary, but that's okay. All right. Any questions before we head on to our next part? All right, follow me. backgrounds coming during this time period is because in our first major period or in our second major period of immigration, there was this kind of system put into place called the quota system, which essentially limited the amount of people who can come from specific countries. The way it looked is that if you were coming from, let's say, Britain, you had a higher number of people who could come versus if you were coming from a country in Asia or Africa, much lower number of people who could come. So if you were somebody that was highly educated, it was a lot easier for you to immigrate to the US during this time. The second major period of people that were coming during this time were people who were refugees. This was a result of the Refugee Relief Act, which was put into place in 1953. It was mainly for people who were coming from communist countries, but over 2,000 Palestinian refugees that were a part of the original Nakba in the year 1948 were able to come to the US during this time. Which brings us to the story of Ahmed Ibrahim. I am pulling up my notes about him because a lot of this information that you all are hearing, you all will actually be the first group to hear, so that makes you all pretty special, which is exciting. But a little bit about him is that he is from a village in Palestine called Jimsu. Now, a little bit about Jimsu is that if you look at it on a map today, it's not there. And for a very long time, it was forgotten. Because for essentially during the 1948 Nakba, when the village was ethnically cleansed, there was very little remaining of it. Until roughly the 1990s when it was discovered that Ahmed Ibrahim, so think about it this way, he's like this old man who's like 70, he decided to actually draw his village from memory. Or it was discovered that he drew his village completely from memory. Until roughly the 1990s when it was discovered that Ahmed Ibrahim, so think about it this way, he's like this old man who's like 70, he decided to actually draw his village from memory. Or it was discovered that he drew his village completely from memory. And eventually, later on in her life, she was actually able to go back to Palestine and do the same thing, essentially help Palestinians that were resisting their homes being destroyed by the Israeli government. So this is a very common theme that we see in our third period of Arab immigration in the U.S. Those quota systems, which initially limited the amount of people who could come from specific countries, are gone. So you see a lot more people coming to the U.S., and these people are able to kind of like help when it comes to like a lot of civil rights related issues, which is a big close to the south end of Dearborn. Ford. They had plants there, and the thing with the Ford power plants is that they release a lot of pollution, which is a big issue that we see even until today. But back then in the 1960s, Ford had plans with the city of Dearborn to essentially demolish the homes that were there and in favor of being able to expand their operations. And the thing is, people were living in these homes. Now, Mrs. K. Elder was somebody from Palestine. This is something that obviously happens in Palestine. So she was obviously going to take a stand against this. Talk about Palestine, because there was a big event that happened in Palestine in the 60s, specifically 1967. Do we know what was happening in 1967 in Palestine and the Arab world at large? Or at least in the Levant section of the Arab world? It's okay if you don't know, by the way. Ooh, so, a little bit about 1967. There was an event called the 6-Day War. During this time period, Israel, a bunch of different Arab countries were essentially at war with Israel. And what ended up happening is Israel ended up, unfortunately, winning. And so a lot of the land that belonged to these different Arab countries was actually won by Israel, and then Israel, after those 6 days. And then what ended up happening is eventually a lot of this land was given back. However, a lot of the Arab countries were more resistant to being able to essentially battle Israel. And then a lot of Palestinian land was lost following this. So that's why 1967 is a very significant year when we talk about Palestine. Over here, we see a specific type of garment. Does anyone know what it's called? A thobe, right? The thobe is worn, what type, is the thobe worn by just women or just men? No, it's worn by anybody regardless of their gender, right? Now, there's a couple of now there's something that makes the Palestinian so distinct. You're going to notice that there's a lot of different symbols on it. What are some of the symbols that we see embroidered onto it? Al-Aqsa. What is Al-Aqsa? It's a very holy site in Palestine. It's a mosque, yeah. What other things do we see here? The flag of what country? Palestine, yeah. What else do we see? Tatriz. What's tatriz? It's embroidery, and it's very specific to Palestine, right? Now, what do we see over here on the sleeve?
Flowers.
They're not flowers. I'll give you a hint. It's a type of plant. You eat it. Olives. Yes. Why are Why are olives significant to Palestine? Olive trees, right? It's one of the major ways that people get their income there. So this is meant to represent Palestinian heritage, or your backgrounds as Palestinian, a bunch of different things that represent the Palestinian identity. And this is why we oftentimes say like culture is a form of resistance, because you're able to essentially preserve your culture and prevent it from being erased by being able to essentially wear it and show it to people. Think about the coins, the keys. Yeah. Now, do we have any questions?